All right, perfect. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for an SME membership fireside chat with Shonali Ditz. I'm Tony Neary, the Director of Community Engagement and Workforce Innovation here at SME, and I'm so excited to facilitate today's conversation. We're talking with Shonali. So Shonali is the co-founder and executive director of SparkShop. SparkShop is a nonprofit dedicated hands-on STEM education program for fourth and fifth graders across Chicago. And since being founded in 2017, they have inspired over 6,000 students, driven by Shonali, and I have to give a nod in there to Tiernan's vision for a more diverse and inclusive STEM workforce. With a background in automotive industry, Shonali recognized the critical need for diversity in technical roles, and under her leadership, SparkShop has grown significantly, developing over 100 unique engineering lesson plans and expanding its team. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Shonali's journey, her background, her impact on the future STEM workforce, as well as some of her future plans. So Shonali, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Well, you know, I'm a card-carrying member of your fan club and have been since we met in 2018. Your transition from the automotive industry to forming SparkShop for me is really fascinating, and I think it speaks to who you are as a person. So let's talk a little bit about what your experience in automotive looked like and what really inspired the shift to start SparkShop.
Definitely. And yeah, thank you so much. I feel like I'm also your number one fan. So it's always an exciting conversation. So I studied manufacturing and design engineering, got a job in the auto industry, very much like followed the steps that made sense to me. And I really fell in love with like the manufacturing side of things in college and getting to build and create things that are just out in the world. So I spent a couple years at a supplier to the OEMs working on fuel system parts and really loved that early stage design, getting to like see the cars years before they were released and still like pointing out cars that had a part that I worked on is like a thing I can't help but do. So that was the part of the auto industry I loved. The part I did not love was just the crushing lack of diversity. And there were so many initiatives to try to change it, and they just all felt a little too slow. So for me and Tiernan, like we were in our 20s, we were roommates, and we were trying to think about like, how can we change this? How can we make this something that's more accessible, and how can we do it faster? Because I think more than anything, we were impatient with like how slow things seem to change. So we came up with SparkShop and really we're thinking, what's something that we could do that would make a positive change in the world that we want to see and uses the skills we have, because we were like relatively fresh in our careers, enough so that we didn't want to do a huge pivot. And this idea emerged to really bring the things that we loved about engineering and making and creating into elementary schools to try to create a workforce that is so much more diverse, so much more inclusive. And then also for all the kids that still won't follow that career path, for them to see all the joy that there is in creating things.
And I love the little caveat on the story is the SAE team. And that was actually how you met Tiernan, right? Is on the SAE team while you were in school for engineering.
Yes. Yeah. So I had not been a car person before. I went to college with my learner's permit that I extended a few more times. I think I got my license at 19. So it was not like a natural place for me to go. But I struggled with the engineering classes initially and had this moment of like, all right, well, is this really what I want to do? And the Formula SAE team felt like the most intense way to figure it out. Like, I guess I'll learn how to build a car and work with these people. They seem to really love engineering.
And
Um,
I was going to say, I think it's important for people to hear that is that you were struggling with the engineering classes,
mhm.
but it was that kind of out of school extracurricular work that brought it all to life for you that was like, wait a minute, I can do this.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it's so tough for young people, right, as we're trying to get into this field. And the second that you kind of falter or don't do well in a class, people are very quick to say, like, this isn't for everyone. It's actually really hard. And really share a lot of discouraging messages, right? And I had this feeling like, I really do think I'd like it. I think I just don't like chemistry, right? I think I just don't like being in a calculus lecture. And the formula team let me try that out. And the first thing I got to do on that team was learn how to weld because I didn't know how to do anything else. And there were people who had built engines before and people who had, um, done coding and done different things that were necessary. Welding was like a wide open area of the team that no one had claimed. So I got to do that. And that's really where I found kind of my confidence back. And I think being on that team was so instrumental, not just to like helping me really find my path in engineering, but also, like you said, meeting my co-founder. I became project manager of that team. I learned a lot of skills I use now in my job. We had to do some fundraising. We had to do all kinds of things that really equipped me to do nonprofit work.
And I think it's interesting for me that I feel like having that hands-on experience to really validate your confidence is part of what triggered the creation of SparkShop. So talk a little bit about going from engineering to creating a nonprofit and then leaving engineering to run a nonprofit full time.
Sure. Yeah. I think we definitely assumed that a nonprofit would be like easier than a startup because it didn't have to make money. And that has not been true. It was just as complicated, just as difficult. But we really designed the programs first and then the organization kind of around it. And it was so fun to think about, what are all the things that we love that got us into this field, and having those experiences working with teams and working with questions where there's not one right answer and you get to be creative. Like all of that was so joyful. And we really only got to that in the later years of college. So part of our theory was like, let's do that so early, right? Let's do that early enough that the kids can really see how much fun there is and then be motivated through all those other gates that they have to get through. And then we also did a lot of design work on like, how do we reach the kids that aren't like little Shonali and little Tiernan, right? Like we did find our way into the field and so many people don't. So how do we build a program that also gets them really excited? And that took a lot of like working with teachers, working with friends, working with others that could kind of cover our blind spots and find different ways to engage young people. But that part was so fun.
I was going to say, and I remember you were still then pre-pandemic carrying desktop mills and 3D printers into programs and showing technology. Talk about what your program looked like pre-2020 and post-2020, because I think that pivot is also really important in why you're flourishing and thriving still.
Definitely. Yeah. I think our pre-pandemic program really was a traveling circus. It was like the two of us coming into a classroom, unloading our cars with machinery and materials and experiments and all kinds of gadgetry, and really leading a high energy workshop with the kids. So they, like for a lot of the kids, we were the first engineers they're meeting. And so we kind of took that responsibility very seriously to then be like so fun and so positive and so connected to them. And it was all about that relationship building to provide them with some really friendly role models right out of the gate. So we would do two 90-minute workshops, and then we had some lessons for teachers to kind of keep that energy going, that took it back to their core subjects. So if we were teaching about manufacturing and how things are made, we'd bring in old tools, new tools, and then a teacher would lead a social studies lesson that kind of walks through those eras of history. Or they might lead an art lesson on creating stamps and like some sort of repeatable artwork, something like that. But what we wanted to do was not just get the kids excited, but have the teachers see like this connects to every part of the school day if you want it to.
I love that. And now let's talk about some of the bigger challenges that you maybe did not see coming in starting a nonprofit. Just in case somebody else is sitting here inspired of like, oh, I think I could do this too. What were some of the unforeseen challenges with really launching SparkShop as a full-time job and nonprofit?
Oh yeah. I mean, always fundraising, but I do think like part of how we were able to crack that was looking really honestly at the STEM ecosystem and saying like we're not the first ones to recognize this problem, right? A lot of smart people are working on this. A lot of good programs are happening. So our position is not to like replace those, right? But to very honestly see, right, why are they not working the way they should? And many of them are having great impacts, but still we're not seeing the effect that we want to in the industry and in classrooms and in higher ed. So we had to do a lot of work to figure out what niche will we kind of carve out for ourselves, and then how do we tell that story to a funder. um so I feel like if there are people here who want to start a nonprofit, my advice is also do it. Like you could probably do it, but I think one of the hardest things was just learning how much we did not know, right? And at every stage of growth it would feel like, all right, I think I know what we're doing, and suddenly we're at a size now where we need to like do an audit, and that's like scary all over again. So I think having a sense of what's coming next has always been challenging because we're still in some ways living in startup mode. And there are things that people said, oh, you don't have to worry about that till you're big. And suddenly we're big, right? We're big for what we were. I would say that's been a challenge. But for the most part, I feel very like lucky to be working in STEM education because so many folks support it, right? It is like in many ways not that controversial, right? Everyone wants the best for our kids. Folks in the industry want more talent. So we are able to really step in and solve a problem that's out there rather than having to sort of offensively pitch and get people on board. Like people know that this is work that needs to be done.
Yes, absolutely. And then I think let's talk about the pivot because
Mhm.
we hit, suddenly you can't travel in with a desktop mill and you can't go into a classroom. And now we're relying on educators doing all of this training with content they may not be very comfortable with. So let's talk about the pivot and what that looked like to make sure students were still having those kind of aha STEM moments.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when our school flipped to remote, that was obviously like a stop to the programs. But I think that we were almost heading there anyway, partly because the model we had built was so exciting and so impactful, but it wasn't scalable at all, right? We were like, how do we find someone else to sort of join the traveling circus? Or if we're in schools all these days of the week, who is keeping the business running and who's, fundraising and doing all those elements? Um, Also, even before COVID, Tiernan and I were getting sick all the time because we were in these new school communities, getting coughed on by different kids and moving in and out. So, as soon as the pandemic emerged, it was like, oh my gosh, we would be such a super spreader in this scenario. We need to stop. Um, but I think it gave us the opportunity to see like how else do we do what we're trying to do? Because I don't think that's something we would have been able to do on our own. Like people liked the workshops, they liked that program. It would have been very hard to take it away and replace it, but we had to. And I feel, or we were very lucky. We had recently received a grant to sort of hire some interns, get some extra help, and the grant maker was super flexible. So we went into the pandemic with a little bit of a surplus and some flexibility, which I think was the greatest gift of all. And it was just us two. I think the fact that it was just me and her and our bills were really low meant that we could take a beat and think about what people actually need. Um, if we think about March, April, May of 2020, STEM education was not the focus, right? We were worried
Right.
about internet connectivity, food, health, safety, like housing, basic stuff. And so we just kind of waited for a second. We put out a couple resources online, but we did a lot of just asking teachers what they need, trying to get Zooms, trying to connect by email and just see what do you need? What do your kids need? And a huge part of what we heard was hands-on learning, something to get them off of the computers, right? The remote learning really wasn't ideal for anybody, but the teachers were so strapped for resources. So then we did this pivot to say, all right, we don't need to be the ones teaching, but we can send them the stuff. A lot of Chicago schools had meal pickup happening for our students. About 86% of the kids that we're working with are from low income households, and they're all qualifying for food pickup. So, along with sort of lunch and homework and other things, our kids were able to come and get their like engineering kit every month. And we had a bunch of lessons that we just sent far and wide through Google Slides so teachers could put them up in their classroom, share them out. And it became a thing that the students could look at and then like close the laptop and do and make and create. And so we had a ton of fun, like re-envisioning all the different lessons and thinking about what are all the kinds of things we want to teach them. And we moved to this model of a career focus, right? So they got to move through being a mechanical engineer, an environmental engineer, an industrial engineer, and just with those different flavors of the types of problems, practice the engineering design process and do something super open-ended and fun, right? Which was so needed at the time.
And both my kids, I think were in third and fourth grade when everything happened. And we had Moira doing one of the kits at my house, and she loved it, watching the YouTube video and kind of following along and getting a little servos motor going. So I know it was engaging. And yes, I can tell you, as even a parent, it's like, oh my gosh, there's got to be some things that we can do. So
Yeah.
a very, very successful pivot in that occasion. So now your impact has grown. I believe it's over 6,000 students.
Be even more than that as of this school year. I think we crossed 8,000 because we're working with so
Amazing.
many this year. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of one of the great things to come out of that model is we gave the teachers this resource and then around the end when we were talking about, in-person schooling returning, our teachers were saying like, "Oh, I hope you guys don't take this away." Right? What's going to happen to this great program? And at that point, it was still just me and Tiernan. So I was making all these lessons at a breakneck pace. Like monthly was not necessary, but that's what we picked. And so we were doing this wild turnaround. And Tiernan was doing all the sourcing and packing the boxes in her home or a storage unit. And that was going out to about 800 kids, 800 or 900 kids, like every month. wild, so inefficient. And but it was something that we could hire for and grow because it was no longer this like entertainment experience of the two of us.
Right.
And we got grant funding to bring in people with nonprofit experience, with teaching experience, with like all the things that we had kind of DIY'd and picked up along the way. We got to bring in experts and folks who really knew what they were doing and knew how a nonprofit should run. And that just really accelerated what we've been able to do. So yeah, this year we're supporting 40 schools across the city of Chicago, and we have a team of 7 people doing all kinds of cool stuff.
Amazing. What do you think are some of the most effective strategies in building a student's confidence and interest in STEM?
Yeah. Our approach is really to look at where they are already confident and engaged. And so trying to tie STEM into their interests and into their areas where they already feel like a rock star, because then you're not starting from square one. So we have a lot of students, like we do a survey, pre-survey and post-survey. We always ask what they want to be when they grow up. And a lot of kids say veterinarian or a dog trainer or a dog walker or something. We have a lot of kids that love pets. So when we did our biomedical engineering unit, one of the activities we did was an animal prosthetic. So we could teach any kind of prosthetic, right? The idea of designing an engineered replacement for a limb. And I believe we made it an art activity. We had some more intense like STEM lessons than our humanities lessons, but we brought into that, make a prosthetic fin for a shark or a prosthetic leg for a dog. Um, and the kids have so much fun with it and they get to see like this thing I like and care about, engineers work on that. And so it's a really nice way to just transfer some of that confidence rather than starting from the beginning. And I'll say the other thing is being able to recognize those engineering practices. I think the word engineer sounds so scary and it sounds like this faraway thing you can only really claim when you're out of college and in this job. But there are all kinds of ways that kids are designing things and iterating and fixing, repairing. And as educators and as just adults with kids in our lives, to be able to like commend them for that, to notice it in the moment and say like, wow, you did a really amazing job solving that problem, fixing that thing. All of that elevates the confidence that they have to do the actual work that goes within the field.
I love that. And then let's talk a little bit about the metrics and really measuring the impact and effectiveness of your program. So how are you measuring that, and where does it look like you see the biggest kind of jump or change with students?
Yeah, so we measure a bunch of things, and our assessment kind of falls into a couple different categories. We have, what are the stats we collect for the shiny reports to donors, right? Saying, oh, the program's so effective, it's great. We see these leaps in confidence and behavior and identity. Like all of that is what we look for. We also do a lot of feedback gathering to just see how can we do it better, right? And we ask the kids, what was your favorite activity? What did you like? And we try to do some analysis of that to make sure that they're all finding kind of footholds in the curriculum that they're really into. Um, but the really key things that we want to see moving when it comes to positive like outcomes, educational outcomes, are that confidence. So them feeling like I'm capable of doing this, I know this stuff, and I can learn these things. Um, Identity. So feeling like I am an engineer, I am a scientist. That sort of thinking really locks in these late elementary school years, which is so hard to think about as adults because to think of an 11-year-old saying, I'm not a math person when they've maybe gotten to like division, right? Some fractions and stuff, like they're ruling out so much that they haven't seen yet. So we want that strong sense of identity to form, that they feel like they are an inventor and an entrepreneur and all of those things. We also do look for behavior changes. So as the kids get a little bit older, we're trying to figure out, are they going to the museums we have? Are they going to other summer camps? We know there's a rich ecosystem of STEM opportunity. Are they able to take advantage of it? So those are some big
I
things.
I
Yeah.
love that. And I know when we talk about STEM exposure, we talk about early and often, because these students need to have continuous access. And STEM is a very, very diverse field because you can hit healthcare, you can hit engineering, you can hit manufacturing. There's really limitless in what it can do. Can you talk a little bit about how early exposure to STEM fields really alter the trajectory for students with underrepresented backgrounds?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the earlier students are made aware of these opportunities, the better, right? The more it feels like they have that solid foundation of confidence and interest, the less they are shaken by all of that societal messaging that starts to come as they get older, right? For young girls, for young students of color. And as they get older, it also becomes a lot harder to do STEM the way we do, right? Which is all sunshine and rainbows and opportunity. It's all so positive when we talk to fourth and fifth graders. But we also have a small internship program for high schoolers. And when we had those students in, they're asking much tougher questions, right? They're talking to us about discrimination in the workplace that they're worried about. They're talking about what it's like to be for English to be your second language and how that impacts showing up in an engineering space, how people will treat you. And those are things we don't get to gloss over as they get older, right? We have to really prepare them for the reality of what the world is. But I think by starting early, we give them a little bit more resilience and confidence to shut out a lot of that other messaging.
So important.
Yeah.
And then as you're launching some of these programs, you've got some alumni students now. Let's talk a little bit about what some of those alumni programs look like. So when you first started, those students are at what grade level now?
Oh my gosh, I feel like we have a couple waves. So we do have some students from our earliest programs who are seniors
Okay.
in high school. One of them came and interned with us last summer, which is a real treat, and that's like why we started the internship program, was to try to keep these students kind of in our circle and keep supporting them as they get older. And that said, he got the traveling circus experience, right? So I think it'll be about 2 to 3 more years before we start to see kids that had the full year of STEM curriculum built by our team entering high school. And yeah, our alumni programs are really to figure out how lasting is the impact of our fourth and fifth grade work, because we're able to point to a lot of studies that validate pieces of what we do. But I think that we've blended them in a way that's like uniquely effective, and we really want to be able to say how. So we're doing some design challenges for middle schools, mostly as an opportunity to check in with those teachers, check in with the students, remind them that we are here and we exist, and get another survey point. One of the other things that we're collecting in our data, so aside from the sort of quantitative things that we can analyze, are a lot of surveys, focus groups, kind of open qualitative feedback from teachers. That's where we're starting to capture things that feel harder to measure. So we know well about the STEM outcomes for our kids. Something we also hear in our programs is that the students get better at handling failure, right? Working in teams, giving and receiving tough feedback, things that are really, really critical and hard to develop, and something that a lot of teachers have named like problems with since remote learning and since coming back. So those are some of the things that through our alumni programs, we also want to be able to see like, hey, how do we measure that? How do we measure all the unintended things coming out of this work? Because I think that STEM, when it's taught well, can be such a powerful vehicle for students to really build a strong sense of self, right? And to feel a lot of agency, right? Over looking at problems in the world and saying, I have tools to fix this, right? I can make a difference in the things that I care about. And that's something that's much harder to measure on a survey, but we really want our kids to feel like that.
And I love, for me, the comfort level with failing. I think failure is an option. And my new favorite acronym I've learned in the last year is FAIL, stands for first attempt in learning. So you want to fail, but you want to fail upward, which is something that is a concept that would never, ever would have been discussed when I was in school. But
Oh, no.
right. Let's talk a little bit about professional development for teachers, because I also think sometimes students can pick up on this technology a little quicker than teachers can. So can you talk a little bit about, I really think it's your secret sauce, the professional development and the support that you really give for teachers?
Yeah. So professional development is something we started offering as soon as we had teachers on our team, like former educators, just because they have the context to really help teachers from a place of like compassion and understanding. There's a lot of training out there for teachers that they don't love. So I was like, we're only going to get into that if we have experts. But we had been, supporting teachers for years and hearing from them like that we had really helped them change how they talk about things and how they approach open-ended problem solving and how they support their students through challenging STEM activities. And we thought like, well, they should get credit for that, right? We should do the training, help them get those hours that they need to stay certified. And it's another piece of value that we can offer to the district. So we added professional development really focused on design thinking and walking teachers through that process, getting them comfortable, because it's such a different model of teaching, right? To
Right.
sort of gently support your students, knowing there's no right answer at the end of this, right? There's no back of the book you can flip to and tell them where to go. So we get the teachers together, let them really engage as learners, like walk through the lessons, have some fun, but then also talk through where there might be roadblocks for their students, what accommodations they might be able to make. And that PD has been so instrumental in building their confidence, which is really, really key. Like we talked about how important it is for students to have confidence. And something that has been measured is the sort of contagiousness of a teacher's lack of confidence. So that's something that really shows up in young girls with math. If a teacher is not confident in math, the young girls in the classroom are picking up on those implicit messages, right? That this brilliant person they're learning from, math is too hard for them. Right. And they're internalizing that. And so we want to make sure that when our teachers, who have to be experts in 10,000 things, also step into STEM and start to teach that they are conveying a sense of comfort and ease and confidence so that the students don't feel that fear.
I can agree with that because I remember Moira came home and her teacher had said something about math is hard. And it's like there's a huge difference between math is hard and math can be hard, and the way that girls embed that information versus how boys do too. It's so powerful.
Absolutely. And like it's all hard. To be really good at anything is hard. And still we're equipping them to do it. So yeah.
I love it. Can you share a couple of your favorite success story moments from SparkShop that really kind of highlight your work? And I think one of them could probably be my baseball cap that you see me posting that I wear all over town as SparkShop loves you. But can you share a couple of your favorite success stories with us?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that one always makes me so happy. Like on our post survey, we asked the kids, what advice would you give to next year's SparkShop students? Because they're young enough, we're not trying to poke them for testimonials or any sort of specific compliments, but we tell them like, what would you tell someone else? And a lot of the advice is just like, work hard, keep trying. There's an equal mix of it's fun because it's easy and it's fun because it's hard, which is funny. A huge range of things. Some students are very specific about, like don't lose your materials, be careful with wires, they're fragile. You get practical stuff. And then you do get those just warm, fuzzy things, right? Where they're saying SparkShop is so much fun. You're going to love it. It's such a great place to like practice all these things. Even though it's just happening in their classrooms, they're feeling sort of that warm, friendly bubble that we wanted to create. And then we had one student write in all caps, don't worry if you make mistakes. It's all okay. SparkShop loves you. So SparkShop loves you was on like all of our merch that year because it was just so sweet. And like, that's exactly how we want them to feel. I think that's been one of the funny challenges about getting bigger is that as our materials also look more polished and as we're meeting schools that we're not like in the doors of all the time, we can seem far away, right? I think it'd be easy for our schools to think it's like a Scholastic newsletter or something, right? That just appears. And we really want the kids to remember, like, we're just down the street. This is like for you in our city. And all the role models are local. All the stories are local. Like, we want them to know that they can reach out to us.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, you have to share the university story because it's one of my favorites. We talked about it at IMTS and I'm like, "Oh my gosh. This is what happens when you start early." Do you want to talk a little bit about the project?
Of course, that was so much fun. Yeah, so we partnered with Northwestern University and their freshman design thinking and communication course. So Northwestern, all the freshman engineers have to do these group projects that are like using the design thinking project or process to create something for a client. And so we went in as a client and asked them to try to create something for our students to safely cut cardboard. We wanted a tool that was pretty cheap that we could send a couple thousand of across the city. We needed it to be safe. Like cardboard is such a great building material, but we can't do X-Acto knives, right? Or any kind of sharp blade. So we had thrown them that challenge. And all of these students were so bright and came up with all these different ideas. And on prototyping day, they came to one of our schools in the city and we were just kind of facilitating we had told the fourth, or I think it was a fifth grade class because they'd been doing SparkShop with us for a little bit. We told them, you're going to be user testing today. You're not inventing, you are going to be testing their prototypes. And the kids were so excited. They were like so energized to meet these like young, cool college engineers too. That's such a magical age to be like 18 and 19 and on your own when you're 11. And a lot of the prototypes like broke as they do, right? Like a lot of them also worked, like there was a rope saw kind of thing, which was so clever. And then you see a young student just not quite have the motor control. And so you could tell these students were like, the engineers were sweating. Like the college kids were so stressed because their projects weren't working. It's winter, they're in midterms, they're so stressed. Um, but the little ones were amazing and they gave a lot of good feedback. They tried everything out. We did a little Q&A at the end and I had asked them, do you have any other feedback or advice or questions for our engineers? And one of the fifth graders said he gave a perfect compliment sandwich, right? Like one of the tools we have them do is in giving constructive feedback. He said, um, I'm so glad, or like, thank you so much for coming to our classroom. All of these ideas were so creative. It was so cool how many different things you came up with. Most of them did break, but they were really interesting. And I'm proud of you. I think you should keep going.
I love it.
It
It's
was
so
amazing.
good.
And it was so natural to him and it was so natural to all of their class. Like they're so used to kind of building each other up, giving that honest feedback, addressing failure. And these freshmen were so uncomfortable being told, like most of them broke. They were like, oh God, yeah. You could tell like they have not had that. They're learning it the hard way in college, right? That failure is inevitable and we get over it. But it was so cool to see them do that. And like these 18 and 19-year-olds were so uncomfortable receiving that kind of sweet constructive feedback from a really young kid, but it was amazing.
Well, and I think teaching them even the compliment sandwich, make sure
Yeah,
that you thank somebody for their time and make sure that you give them some feedback and then close out with another compliment on something they've done well is an absolute life skill. But more importantly, taking that feedback without taking it personally and using it as constructive feedback is like a superpower.
totally. Totally. I think it'd be really easy to hear that and kind of roll your eyes and just hear the like everything broke, right? Like I think a lot of us were conditioned that way. And it was such an awesome experience to see the young people try to do it and for them to put on their like expert hats, right? And be the audience that is giving the feedback rather than the people prototyping. To watch people older than them, make some mistakes is so valuable. And of
Yeah.
course, to them, they still have like stars in their eyes. They're still like, these are such bright, incredible people. It doesn't change that perception at all.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. So, how do you go about incorporating feedback, not just from the students, but the educators into your program development?
Yeah, so it is like a continuous process, but we do, I would say, a mix of some kind of customization and tweaking. If a teacher reaches out and says, I have this specific strange schedule or classroom need, whatever it might be, we have one member of our team who is totally dedicated to the teacher support piece. So they are like on call to the teachers, they help with recruitment and support, but they are there if they hit any roadblocks. And I think most of our schools don't also, but knowing that there is a human on the other end of the line that they can call for help makes such a difference in their willingness to like try something new and jump in. Um, as far as incorporating their feedback going forward, we do a lot of tuning the units constantly, but every year, like we do 4 different career units because we slowed down from the monthly schedule. And we've made changes. I'm trying to think of some of the recent ones. We've pulled a lot of words off of slides where we can and replace them with images so that it's much more friendly to English language learners and diverse learners. And we, as of this year, have started offering a set of bilingual slides as well. We have a lot of native Spanish speakers in our schools that are learning English, but we don't want that to be an exclusion for the program, right? So we're working on, I would say most of the feedback that we get is really about how do we increase accessibility of our programs, make them just easier and easier to run, friendlier to kids that are on reading levels that range wildly, right? And so in some places we'll have a writing extension that's meant to, meet those standards, practice those skills, but also we want to make sure that when it's STEM time, every kid gets to dive in. One piece of
Love
feedback
that.
we got in a focus group that was so valuable. And now we're kind of tracking, like, is this true everywhere? Is that a teacher told us the kids that don't usually engage in school are super engaged during SparkShop time. And it's like, all right, well, that's really, really cool, right? Kids who maybe aren't feeling that level of belonging in school or that level of like optimism about what's next can still dive in and have a really great time and know that there is a whole kind of career path. There's a whole world of things they can keep exploring and doing. So that's something we worked into our surveys now to say, hey, we heard this once. Do you agree, disagree? To all of our teachers, 100% of teachers said yes. So that's the kind
Amazing.
of thing now that we're like, all right, how can we make sure that in the design of our programs, we're aiming for that, right? That's no longer just a little accident. That's a matter of our intentional program design.
I love that. And talk a little bit about how you've spread, because it's really been word of mouth.
Yeah.
And it's not really knocking on the doors of administrators and saying, we'd love to implement in your program. Can you talk a little bit about your growth strategy and what that's looked like?
Definitely. Yeah. So much of, I mean, the early programs were just a matter of who would let us in, right? Like what kind of teacher and administrator would open up the doors and let us try stuff. Now that the program is so much more systematized and we like understand what the impacts are, we understand what a school needs to do. When we recruit a new school, it tends to be through another nonprofit community partner for the most part. We don't do a lot of like campaigning or some or like a recruitment of schools broadly, partly because the schools that will reach out will be those with the most resources, right? With their finger on the pulse of where to find things. And we know, like, as big as we are, we still have a pretty limited capacity. And we made the decision to aim all of our work and our efforts at under-resourced schools. So we are only running in schools that are predominantly serving low-income families, students of color, a high percentage of English language learners. All of those kind of qualify a school to work with us. That is most schools in Chicago. But there are a lot of schools who want to do STEM stuff. There are also a lot of STEM programs you can buy. So we've decided we're not going to go into that lane. We'll work through organizations that have great relationships with networks of schools. Communities in Schools is a huge national one. They kind of distribute resources to schools that are all eligible for our program. So then we're able to simplify our efforts, lean on that partnership, and say, hey, we've got spaces for 8 more schools. And they put the word out. But what's really key to us in getting the program running is that teacher relationship. We always love to have the administrators bought in too, because I think that's what leads to the longevity in a school that makes us more immune to like turnover. But I think from our early days, the workshop days, I have such vivid memories of walking into offices and just seeing the dusty boxes of maybe it was a 3D printer that someone bought, but then they left and no one's touched it. And I think knowing how much work goes into building and delivering our program, we're not at a size yet where we want to be doing that. So it is all about making sure that the whole school community is so invested in running the program, the teacher is supported, that that's really our growth strategy is find them and give them what they need.
And you've grown every year, so obviously it's working. And then you have teachers that leave one school and go to another, and they're like, hey, come with us. So I think you're doing something right.
Yeah, I think that's like another one of those big moments of like, oh, hey, like we are really like finding a lot of success at this is when a teacher does bring us into their new community, make sure another teacher has taken over at their old school. That piece has been so valuable.
And I think, I mean, looking at the growth from just the two of you with yourself and Tiernan, and now there's 7 of you at SparkShop. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you know are coming down the pike for SparkShop and how you're kind of preparing and planning for those?
Yeah. So we have always grown. We are still in a stage of growth. So that is always a challenge, right? Of how do we make sure everything grows at the right pace? And I think I'm like, knock on wood, I think this year we're doing it. But there have definitely been times in the past where it's like, amazing, we have a team and we have all these schools, they're so interested. There's almost no money in the bank, right? Like that piece is behind. Or we have money, we have interest, and we just don't have people, right? That was us in 2021, right? When it was just me and Tiernan doing far too much. So I think as I look forward to more of our growth, it's figuring out where do we need staff, where do we need resources, and how do we make sure that all of that is happening together in a way that doesn't burn people out. I think that's something that is so present in the nonprofit world and in education. We hear about it a lot. There was a lot of burnout, a lot of folks that are underpaid for their work, a lot of turnover, and all of those things are, long-term expensive, right? You save a little money underpaying people, but if you're recruiting every year and you're losing knowledge,
Right.
you're not saving that much, right? So I think in this stage of our growth, what we're starting to do is stabilize as an organization and also try to assert those values. As we get bigger, there's a lot of pressure to scale in a really big way or lean more on volunteers and unpaid labor, cut costs, and we're going to try really hard not to. We've had excellent retention of our staff. We've had really amazing growth of all the people in our team taking on more responsibility and doing more. And I think we really want to protect that culture as we get bigger and protect the quality of our work. I think that's the other challenging thing in education is kind of the bigger and broader you get, the more things have to become a little bit simpler, right? To work
Right.
everywhere. And what we offer is complicated, right? Like weekly lessons for these teachers to run, and training and support and internships as the kids get older, and these other elements. It's not very scalable if we were to think about moving into another geography. And the challenge for us right now is sort of to assert that, like, maybe that's okay. And maybe we just get to be local and excellent and so responsive. And we work with partners to share the great stuff we're doing, but sort of present a different vision for how we want to grow in that next stage.
Absolutely. And you briefly touched on volunteers. Talk a little bit about your volunteer base and some of the work that they're doing for you.
Yeah, we have an amazing, amazing bunch of volunteers. So I think last year it was about 250 people throughout the school year that came together to help us with all kinds of things, but mostly kit packing. So all of our programs, every single curriculum unit comes with a student box of their materials, all the stuff they need to build their environmental engineering prototypes or their computer science models. Um, that was sort of a vestige of that pandemic model where every kid had to take their own box and take it home. And when we went back, in school, we also thought, I guess we could do a classroom kit. It would probably save a lot of money. But in that investigation, realized that having the individual kits is actually so valuable, right? For every kid to have their own thing that they
Mhm.
can mess up, right? That they can use differently is really key. I know in schools things are scarce, so there's a lot of the messaging to, use the back of the paper and measure it repeatedly before you cut anything. And to be inventing, you have to be a little messy and you have to be willing to use something if you're not sure. And the box of their stuff lets them do that. It's also like a gift. A lot of the kids or teachers have said that the kids value it a lot. It feels like a present to them from us. And it's something they take home. They talk to their families about. They might do the activities with a younger sibling at home. So there's so much value that we're sticking to it. It does mean like this year we're going to be sending out about 10,000 boxes. So
Wow.
that's where the volunteers come in. Yes. And we've thought about, maybe we could get some stuff packaged, maybe we could pay for it. But it's become this really beautiful way also for people in Chicago to give back and to invest in their schools. So we have a lot of, engineering companies that want to do something different than packing the bags of food or something, right? Something that feels more close to their work and their mission. And so we've had really fun days. And our operations manager, she's been in nonprofits for her whole career. Which also means she's had so many odd jobs. She's a very mysterious person. One of them was wedding DJ. So Jess will always
Wow.
set up a cool playlist, a fun vibe. We can do a happy hour like at someone's office and just bring a U-Haul full of school supplies and we'll set up the assembly line and pack. So we have had a blast doing those volunteer events. It lets us meet more people, lets more people meet us, and take on that work of packing these kits for the young people.
Absolutely. And I have to say, we'll make sure at the end of this that everybody gets your website if they want to volunteer or donate.
Oh my God.
All those are good ways that you can support SparkShop as well. What are some of the most common misconceptions about STEM education that you're encountering, and kind of how do you address those?
Yeah, I think one big misconception is that like these kids are too young to do more than maybe spaghetti bridges and egg drop challenges, and we just know that's not true. Like these kids are so extremely capable of everything, of very, very complex thinking. They are super curious or super tuned in to like the issues that they care about, and they are ready to like learn how to do some new stuff. So I think that's one huge misconception. I think another big misconception happening is folks feeling like, and we don't encounter too much of this, but folks feeling like we've done enough inclusion work, right? I think that is a backlash that is happening.
Yeah.
Super don't agree with it.
Right.
And so we are kind of navigating that space of, I mean, the people who believe that are never going to fund us or really buy into working with us. So in some ways, we're kind of operating in parallel. But I think part of my work and my co-founders' work, right, as founders and leaders of SparkShop, is to think about how we represent our work and our industry and this need back to the industry, right? This amazing generation of kids is going to grow up and they're going to go to school, they're going to be pursuing these jobs, and the place that they land needs to like value and respect them. for everything that they're bringing to the table. So I think there is a misconception there. It's going to take a lot of different factors to kind of push back on it.
I think there's also a lack of understanding for people that have not worked in urban and rural school districts to understand the lack of STEM resources. And part of it is technology, part of it is curriculum, part of it is teachers that are confident with the technology. And I think if you've never gone out and seen the disparagement between like a suburban or elite school district versus urban and rural, like how many things are broken, how many things have never been replaced, like you don't know unless you go and see it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, we need to do more. What can we do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think another thing, um, it's somewhat of a misconception, but I think a lot of folks who have found success in the STEM fields, right? And like you and me, right, landing in this industry, is
Right.
that folks can look down or look in the past and kind of project our own experience onto it, right? And say, that's not really how I learned it. Or they, you know, is that still a valuable pathway? And I think that's a big myth to dispel, right? Kids are going to be coming into the next generation of STEM jobs from all different spaces. And I think that the industry will need an openness to that, right? That the credentials look different, the pathways look different. And that is because of the intentional work that so many people are doing to widen these pathways. Um,
Yeah.
but it's different.
It sure is. And I also think there's a misconception that STEM is a four-letter word, especially when you're looking in urban and rural households where this is something that is not, the parents did not grow up with it. They don't have an exposure. They don't have an understanding. It's like, that sounds really expensive. Can you talk a little bit about how we can support parents and communities to really understand what STEM is all about?
Absolutely. I think there's so many things from just like the organizational to the individual level. But I think on the individual level, being able to speak to young people in our lives about what we do in new ways is so key. I think the way that we talk about our jobs as adults is really weird and mysterious to young people. I don't know if everyone here felt that, but I know growing up, I didn't really know what my parents' friends did. I didn't even really know what my parents did beyond the like elevator pitch. I knew what their day
Mhm.
to day was like in some ways. I'd hear them talk about work, but I didn't have a sense of like who would be good at that kind of job. Is that me? Like, do I have those skills? What kind of problems do you solve? And so that's really the shift we try to bring when we feature people in curriculum videos or when we bring people to like career fairs at schools, because we'll kind of do some amount of matching for that with our partner schools. But it's so wild to think how embedded in the jargon we all are. So even with some coaching, I'll talk to an engineer and say, right, like you got to bring it to fourth and fifth grade level. And when people start asking about, why they picked engineering, they'll talk about how they were good at calculus or something in high school. It's like they don't know calculus yet as a concept or
They
a
don't even
word.
know what that is.
Math, right? We say math and we say, right, like what kind of things do you do? Do you travel for work? Do you work with other people? Do you communicate? Are you fixing? Are you designing? Like to distill our roles down to skills that kids might see in themselves or get excited about goes a long way into demystifying STEM, right? Because very few STEM jobs look like science class or look like math class. And that's what we need kids to see, right? That these are all stepping stones to get you there. Those are not the endpoints.
I love that. And for me, I think it's interesting when we talk about STEM. Oftentimes, again, people are like, oh, no, 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 my child's not good at math or my child's not very good at science. It's like, but maybe they haven't done it in an application format. And that is a huge differentiator. And I think that's what you're doing is you're teaching these kids they can do it, but you're showing them why they would want to and making that link on the back end as well.
Absolutely.
We would like to open it up. If anybody has questions for Shonali, you can go ahead and drop those in the chat. Anything else that you want to share with the team? What's coming down the pike for SparkShop? What's on the horizon?
So let's see, we're supporting, I think it's actually 42 schools this year. And so we are doing all kinds of packing, all kinds of volunteer events. We have Giving Tuesday coming up, which is always a really big fundraising campaign for us. So we have a lot of kind of back end organizational stuff happening there. We are about to open up applications for our next intern cohort. I am so excited because last year we had 11 of the best kids in Chicago. I'm convinced of it. 16 and 17-year-olds spending a couple weeks with us, getting kind of their first paid job under their belts. It really was a career development intensive kind of program, a little more. Sometimes it felt a little bit like summer camp, like we were running a summer camp, but also we paid them. And the plan was, how do we make sure that these kids are so prepared for that next step, right? Give them all the implicit messages that they might not have gotten yet. Give them a network of people to be their recommendation letters in the future, to review college essays. So I'm super excited because that group of kids is applying to college right now. And then we're going to open up the form for any other teenagers who want to work with us this year.
What type of projects did you have the interns working on last summer?
All kinds of stuff. Some of them programmed a Universal Robots cobot. Some of them worked on creating a design for our new office space that we had moved into, I think, 2 weeks before they started. We had a group designing merchandise for our fundraiser. Just kind of some buttons and stickers and shirts. I'll have to send you one. And
I would love it. You know, I would do the whole SparkShop wardrobe. I've got my custom tie-dye t-shirt and I've got my baseball cap. So
yeah, we will have a whole runway show. And the last group was a documentary team. So we also had a group of kids that were just dedicated to recording and like capturing the experience. So part of what was so interesting in that program too is we weren't looking for the kids who were super solid on a STEM pathway. Like we interviewed students who are in AP computer science and they've had summer jobs and they've had after school clubs and coding camps. And when we met those students, the feeling was like, they're good, right? Like they're doing all the things, they're on that pathway. We wanted to recruit students who were curious and like eager to learn, but not sure, right? And help them get to that place of certainty that is, I mean, a little wild to expect at that age, but also demanded, right? As you start to make those decisions about what comes after high school. So it was a fun
I think it's
experience.
important for them to see the stuff that they like and the stuff they don't like. It's just as important to figure out what you don't want to do as it is to figure out what you do want to do as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Well, Shonali, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your inspiring story and the incredible work that you're doing with SparkShop, and your commitment to empowering underrepresented youth in STEM education is truly remarkable. It's clear your efforts are making a significant impact in the greater Chicago area. I'm just, it blows my mind. Like you've grown so much that it's been, like I said, I texted you the other day, like being in the audience and watching the development and growth has just been amazing. So we look forward to see what's coming down the pike, the growth and inspiration of the next generation of engineers and problem solvers. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. Your questions and our engagement are what make these discussions so good. Please take a second to fill out this quick program survey. The link will be in the chat. And then we have a couple more upcoming virtual programs. We've got our Emerging Professionals Industry Coffee Chat. If you've never been to one of those, they're fantastic. And this one will be focused on project management, which, good Lord, I think everybody could use some help in project management. Then after that, we'll have our Manufacturing Industry Coffee Chat, exploring career opportunities through apprenticeships, which we're seeing so much more of right now in the US. And then we'll be closing out in December with our SME Career Cafe, how to prepare for the performance review. So thank you so much for being here, Shonali. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any additional questions, just let us know.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.